For too long, we have been shackled by outdated ideals, Kalos declared, his words slow and deliberate. The treaty served its purpose, keeping the weak alive and allowing mediocrity to fester. But the galaxy belongs to the strong, and the Empire will no longer restrain itself for the sake of peace. A wave of murmurs rippled through the assembly, some voices rising in anger, others in fear. John clenched his fists at his sides, resisting the urge to interrupt. Patience had always been his weapon, but today it felt brittle. Kalos's image shifted, revealing the devastating aftermath of the Empire's betrayal. Ziberian, a neutral planet renowned for its crystalline cities and vibrant culture, now lay in ruins. Fires raged unchecked, and the ground was littered with the wreckage of once thriving settlements. John's heart tightened. He had walked those streets once, marveling at the harmony between the Ziberians and their surroundings. Now it was gone. This is the future, Kalos continued, his tone devoid of remorse. The age of weakness is over. Submit to the Empire, or face annihilation. As the hologram vanished, silence gripped the chamber, broken only by the quiet hum of the translator devices. Chancellor Varen, a serpentine figure with iridescent scales, rose from his seat. His voice, usually measured, trembled as he spoke. "We cannot risk war with the Empire," Varen said. "Their fleets outnumber ours tenfold. Diplomacy, no matter how strained, must be our path forward." John stepped forward, his voice cutting through the growing din. "And what does diplomacy mean now, Chancellor? Appeasement? Capitulation? We have just witnessed the obliteration of an entire world, an unprovoked act of barbarism. Do you think words will stop Kalos when he has already shown his disdain for them?" The room quieted as John's words settled over the delegates. He could see their fear mirrored in their eyes, but also a flicker of hope, a desperate yearning for someone to lead them. He took a steadying breath. For 3,000 years, this council has stood as a testament to what we can achieve together. We have prevented wars, nurtured alliances, and ensured the survival of countless civilizations. To let one tyrant destroy that now would be a betrayal of everything we stand for. He turned to Varen, his gaze unwavering. The Empire is not invincible. Their strength lies in fear and division. If we unite, if we stand firm, they can be defeated. Varen recoiled slightly, but before he could respond, another voice rang out, deep and commanding. "And if we fail? If your defiance brings their wrath upon all of us?" John turned to face the speaker, Commander Ralos, a towering reptilian figure clad in ceremonial armor. Ralos's piercing yellow eyes bore into John, challenging him to provide an answer. "If we fail," John said, his voice steady, "then we fail with dignity. But if we surrender now, there will be no end to Kalos's ambitions. He will dismantle this council piece by piece until nothing remains." The silence that followed was oppressive. John scanned the room, noting the uncertainty etched into every face. He had spent decades navigating these halls, forging bonds across species and cultures. Yet today, all those efforts felt as fragile as glass. The assembly erupted into debate, voices clashing in a cacophony of anger and despair. John stepped back, letting them argue. His mind drifted to Ziberian, to the faces of the diplomats and civilians he had worked alongside during his time there. The memory of their laughter, their boundless curiosity, and their dreams now felt like ghosts clawing at his conscience. A subtle chime from his communicator pulled him from his thoughts. Glancing down, he saw a message from Admiral Victor Wayne, commander of Earth's Defense Fleet. "Urgent update. Empire fleet detected near Cygnus 7. Orders." John tightened his grip on the device. The Empire's advance had already begun, and the Council's indecision would cost them precious time. He looked back at the arguing delegates, their voices blending into meaningless noise. "Enough." Raising his hand, John activated the dais' central controls. A sharp tone silenced the room as every delegate turned their attention to him. His voice, cold and commanding, cut through the stillness. "If this council will not act, then Earth will. We will defend ourselves, with or without your support. But know this, the Empire will not stop with us. When they come for your worlds, There will be no one left to stand with you. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The choice is yours. Unity or extinction. Without waiting for a response, John stepped down from the dais, his steps measured but firm. The chamber remained silent, the delegates stunned into inaction. He didn't need to see their faces to know he had planted the seeds of doubt and courage alike. As he exited the chamber, his mind raced with the enormity of what lay ahead. Earth was prepared to stand alone if it had to, but John knew the odds. The Empire's forces were vast, and their cruelty unmatched. Still, a fire burned within him, a rage born from loss, betrayal, and the unwavering belief that tyranny could not go unanswered. He would return to Earth, not as a diplomat, but as a man ready to fight for the survival of his people. The galaxy had chosen its path, and John Renfield would see it through to the bitter end. The council chamber was a distant memory as John Renfield strode through the halls of the United Earth Command headquarters. His steps echoed against the stark metallic walls, each one deliberate, each one heavier than the last. The weight of his ultimatum at the Galactic Council bore down on him. His gamble had been necessary, but its success or failure remained uncertain. For now, he could only prepare for what he suspected was inevitable: war. In a secured briefing room, John was greeted by Admiral Victor Wayne, the embodiment of Earth's military might. Wayne was a hulking figure with a grizzled beard and eyes sharp as a hawk's, wearing the crisp uniform of the Earth Space Armada. His presence commanded the room, but his expression betrayed concern as John entered. "You've stirred the nest, Renfield," Wayne said, gesturing to the holographic table between them. A projection of the galaxy shimmered above it, with red markers highlighting the Empire's recent movements. Reports are flooding in. They've mobilized fleets along every major sector. Cygnus 7 is the closest, and it's bristling with enough firepower to burn a dozen systems. John glanced at the markers, his jaw tightening. Then we act before they consolidate. If we wait for their fleets to spread, they'll pick us apart. Wayne raised an eyebrow. And act how? We've got ships and firepower, but the Empire isn't just another skirmish. We're staring down an avalanche, and all we've got is a shovel. Before John could respond, the door slid open, and Professor Ethan Marlowe entered, carrying a datapad brimming with schematics. A wiry man with unkempt hair and glasses that perpetually slid down his nose. Marlowe was the antithesis of Wayne's military stoicism. Yet his mind was a weapon as formidable as any fleet. "Apologies for the interruption," Marlowe said, setting the datapad on the table. "But if we're discussing shovels, I'd like to propose we use one that causes localized singularities." His lips quirked into a nervous grin as the hologram shifted, revealing the prototype of a sleek, compact weapon, the Graviton Disruptor. It's not ready for large-scale deployment, but in a controlled operation, it could destabilize the Empire's shield technology, render their ships defenseless. Wayne leaned forward, scrutinizing the projection. "You're saying this thing can punch through their fleets?" "In theory," Marlowe replied, "but it's untested in combat. A risky variable." John studied the projection, his mind calculating. Risk is all we have. If we can disable their shields, even briefly, it'll give us a fighting chance. But we need more than just brute force. We need to hit them where it hurts. Wayne folded his arms. "You're thinking of going behind enemy lines." John nodded. "Their solar annihilator. It's not just a weapon. It's a symbol of their dominance. If we can disable or destroy it, we send a message. The Empire isn't untouchable." Marlowe frowned. "The facility housing it is deep within their territory, heavily guarded, both by fleets and ground defenses. A frontal assault would be suicide." "Then we don't use a frontal assault," John said. "We infiltrate. A small team, fast and precise." Wayne's expression darkened. "You're volunteering, aren't you?" John met his gaze. "I am." The room fell silent. Wayne shook his head, his voice low. "You're a diplomat, John, not a soldier." "Diplomacy has failed," John replied. "Now it's time for action. And if this mission succeeds, we buy ourselves more than just time. We buy hope." Wayne exhaled sharply, the lines on his face deepening. "I don't like it, but if anyone can pull it off, it's you." Just don't expect me to pull punches when I say this is insane. Marlowe adjusted his glasses, his unease evident. I'll need time to prepare the disruptor for field use. You'll also need a team. Experts in infiltration. John nodded. Then we move fast. Every moment we hesitate, more lives are at risk. The three men exchanged grim looks, the weight of their choices unspoken yet understood. The conversation ended, and John departed, leaving Wayne and Marlowe to their preparations. The mission was set in motion, and there was no turning back. Within hours, John found himself aboard a stealth shuttle hurtling toward Norik Prime, the Empire's central stronghold. The silence of the journey was broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the occasional status update from the pilot. John sat in the dim cabin, his gaze fixed on the stars streaking past the viewport. His thoughts drifted to Earth, to the people he had sworn to protect. He thought of Ziberian, of its destruction, and of the lives snuffed out by the Empire's cruelty. A quiet fury simmered beneath his composed exterior. The shuttle landed undetected on the outskirts of Norik Prime, thanks to its advanced cloaking technology. The air on the planet was thick, tinged with a metallic taste that spoke of industry and oppression. Towering spires of obsidian jutted into the stormy skies, each a monument to the Empire's power. John's team moved with practiced precision, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the Solar Annihilator facility. Every step was a calculated risk, every shadow a potential threat. The air was charged with tension, but John remained focused. Failure was not an option. As they neared the facility's core, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed ahead. John signaled for the team to halt, his hand instinctively moving to the small pistol at his side. The footsteps grew louder, and a moment later, the source emerged, General Luther Draken. Draken was a towering figure, his armor gleaming with the insignia of the Empire. His face bore the scars of countless battles, and his eyes gleamed with a cruel intelligence. He stopped, his gaze locking onto John with a mixture of amusement and contempt. "Well, if it isn't Earth's finest diplomat," Draken said, his voice a low growl. "I wondered how long it would take for you to crawl out of your council chambers and into the real fight." John stood his ground, his expression unreadable. "I'm here to stop you, Draken. To stop all of this." Draken laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the corridor. "You? Stop the Empire? You're as delusional as the council you serve. You should have stayed behind your desk, Renfield. At least then, you'd have died with dignity." The confrontation escalated into a brutal exchange, words giving way to action. John fought with a determination fueled by rage and purpose, every move precise yet desperate. Draken was stronger, but John was faster, driven by the knowledge that billions depended on him. The fight ended with Draken incapacitated, his body slumped against the wall. Breathing heavily, John turned to his team. "Secure the core. We end this now." The mission had only begun, but in that moment, John knew there was no turning back. The path ahead was fraught with danger, yet he pressed forward, resolute. The Empire had drawn the line, and John Renfield was determined to cross it. The sky over the Terran defense grid was a tapestry of activity, its serene blue streaked with the trails of warships ascending to low orbit. Command centers buzzed with urgency, their halls echoing with the sharp cadence of orders relayed and received. Humanity was no stranger to conflict, but this was different. A battle for survival, waged against an enemy whose power and ambition dwarfed anything Earth had ever faced. John Renfield stood at the center of the Earthspace Armada's war room, his gaze fixed on the massive holo display dominating the chamber. Fleet formations blinked into view, represented by intricate clusters of light. Red for the Empire, blue for Earth, and a scattering of green representing Allied forces who had answered Earth's desperate call. The Reds far outnumbered the Blues, their ominous presence a stark reminder of the odds humanity faced. Admiral Victor Wayne's voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "We've mobilized 70% of our fleet. The remaining ships are holding defensive positions in the outer colonies. We're still waiting for final confirmations from the Arconan and Zevran delegations. If they join, it'll boost our numbers, but it won't close the gap." John nodded, his jaw tight. "We don't need parity, Admiral. We need strategy. The Empire's strength is in their size, but it's also their weakness. Large fleets are harder to maneuver, easier to disrupt. Wayne grunted in agreement, but his skepticism lingered. Disruption is one thing. Winning is another. The door to the war room slid open, and Professor Ethan Marlowe strode in, carrying a handheld console covered in blinking data streams. His usual disheveled appearance was even more pronounced, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Yet his expression held a glimmer of hope. "I've finalized the Graviton disruptor upgrades," Marlowe announced, placing the console on the central table. "It's operational and field-tested in simulations. If deployed strategically, it can neutralize entire sections of the Empire's fleet." Wayne arched an eyebrow. "Simulations aren't battles, Professor." Marlowe adjusted his glasses. "No, but it's the best chance we've got. I've also integrated the disruptor into a smaller strike craft. A single pilot can carry and deploy it, making it harder for the Empire to counter." John absorbed the information, his mind racing. A single pilot? What's the risk to them? Marlowe hesitated. Significant. The disruptor generates immense energy output, which could destabilize the craft if used improperly. It's a one-way mission unless the pilot is exceptionally skilled. Wayne's expression darkened. "You're asking someone to volunteer for suicide." "Not just someone," John said quietly. The room turned to him, confusion etched on their faces. "I'll fly the mission." Marlowe's eyes widened in alarm. "John, you can't." "I can," John interrupted, his voice firm. "And I will. I've led us to this point. I've asked countless others to risk their lives for this fight. It's only right that I do the same." Wayne shook his head vehemently. "Absolutely not. You're too important to this effort. We need you here, guiding the Council and maintaining unity among the Allies." John stepped closer to the Admiral, his gaze unwavering. "What we need is a symbol. Someone who's willing to stand at the front, to take the risks no one else will. If I don't do this, what message does it send to the people fighting for us?" The tension in the room was palpable. Wayne's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't argue further. He understood, even if he didn't like it. Marlowe, though still visibly uneasy, nodded reluctantly. "I'll configure the craft for you. But you'll need training. Intense, immediate training." "I'll start tonight," John said. "We don't have time to waste." The conversation shifted to tactical details, the atmosphere grim yet purposeful. John listened intently, absorbing every strategy and contingency. He felt the weight of the mission growing heavier, but his resolve remained unshaken. This was more than a battle. It was a declaration that humanity would not bow to tyranny. Later that evening, John found himself in the flight simulator, the hum of machinery filling the quiet chamber. He gripped the controls tightly, his movements precise as he navigated through simulated dogfights and disruptor deployments. The simulations were grueling, designed to push him to his limits. He welcomed the challenge, letting it burn away any lingering doubts. Admiral Wayne observed from the control room, his expression unreadable. He turned to Marlowe, who was monitoring the simulator's output. "How's he doing?" Marlowe adjusted his glasses, his gaze fixed on the data streams. "Better than expected. His reflexes are sharp, and he's adapting to the disruptor's unique mechanics quickly. But the real test will be out there, in the chaos of battle." Wayne nodded slowly. "He's a stubborn bastard. Always has been." The next morning, John stood on the flight deck, the sleek strike craft looming before him. Its design was compact yet menacing, its dark hull shimmering with the faint glow of integrated disruptor technology. Technicians bustled around it, performing final checks and calibrations. John's team gathered to see him off. Wayne, Marlowe, and a handful of officers stood in a solemn line, their expressions a mixture of pride and worry. Wayne stepped forward, clasping John's hand firmly. "You're a better man than I gave you credit for, Renfield. Just don't make me regret letting you do this." John smirked faintly. "I'll do my best." Marlowe approached next, his usual nervous energy subdued. "The disruptor is keyed to your neural interface. It'll respond to your commands, but be careful. It's powerful, and power can be unpredictable." "I'll handle it," John assured him. As he climbed into the cockpit, the weight of the moment settled fully upon him. The canopy sealed with a soft hiss, and the control panels lit up in a cascade of color. John took a deep breath, his fingers resting lightly on the controls. He thought of Earth, of the people he had sworn to protect, and of the countless lives depending on him. Failure wasn't an option. The strike craft rose smoothly from the deck, its engines emitting a low, resonant hum. John guided it toward the void of space, the stars stretching endlessly before him. Behind him, Earth shrank into the distance, a fragile blue sphere against the black. The mission lay ahead, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But John Renfield was undeterred. Humanity had chosen to fight, to defy the overwhelming might of the Empire, and he would lead that fight with every ounce of strength he had. The galaxy would remember this day, not as the day humanity fell, but as the day it stood unyielding against the darkness. The void was alive with chaos. 100 battles raged across the dark expanse, each one a microcosm of the larger war that engulfed the galaxy. Earth's fleet engaged the Empire with relentless ferocity, blue streaks of plasma and red beams of destruction colliding in a deadly symphony. From his cockpit, John Renfield could see the massive flagship of the Imperial fleet, its silhouette a hulking shadow against the stars. It was their target and the culmination of everything he had fought for. The strike craft hummed around him, every control responding seamlessly to his touch. The neural interface buzzed in his mind like a living thing, feeding him data, enemy formations, energy signatures, weapon locks. The graviton disruptor glowed faintly in its housing, a weapon of immense power waiting to be unleashed. "Command, this is Renfield," John said, his voice steady despite the maelstrom outside. "I'm in position, beginning the run." Admiral Wayne's voice came through the comms, a growl of both pride and concern. "Copy that, Renfield. We've cleared a path as best we can. The rest is on you." "Good luck." John accelerated, weaving through the debris of shattered ships and the blinding explosions of ongoing skirmishes. The Empire's defenses were relentless, but his small craft was designed for this: speed, precision, stealth. A formation of enemy interceptors appeared in his path, their sleek frames pivoting to intercept him. He clenched the controls and dove into their midst, his pulse quickening as he dodged their fire with razor-thin margins. The disruptor pulsed beneath him, its energy building. "Marlowe, status on the device?" he asked, his voice taut. Professor Marlowe's voice crackled in response. "Energy levels are optimal. Remember, you'll have to get close, within 5 clicks of the flagship, for the disruptor to breach its shields." "Understood," John replied, his jaw tightening. 5 clicks. Close enough to feel the heat of their guns, close enough to make the mission almost impossible. The interceptors closed in, their lasers streaking past his craft. John spun the ship into a sharp barrel roll, releasing countermeasures that flared behind him. The pursuing ships veered, 2 colliding in a brilliant burst of fire. The others regrouped, their pilots relentless. They were the Empire's elite, and they fought like it. The comms crackled with static as Admiral Wayne broke through. "Renfield, we're seeing heavy resistance on your vector. Reinforcements are en route, but you'll have to hold out." "No time," John said. "I'll handle it." The flagship loomed ahead, its dark hull bristling with weapon emplacements and shield generators. Every second brought him closer to the moment of truth. The interceptors tightened their formation, boxing him in. John gritted his teeth, his hands moving instinctively over the controls. He banked hard left, then sharply right, forcing the enemy into a bottleneck. With a flick of a switch, he unleashed the disruptor's secondary function, a concentrated pulse of gravitic energy. The interceptors shuddered, their systems faltering as the pulse overloaded their engines. One by one, they drifted into silence, their pilots stunned but alive. "Path is clear," John said, the strain evident in his voice. Moving to final position. The flagship's guns roared to life, massive beams of energy slicing through the void. John pushed the craft to its limits, weaving through the deadly barrage. The disruptor's energy levels climbed, its power nearing critical mass. Sweat dripped down his temple as he maneuvered, every second an eternity. Then, the warning lights flared. The Empire had locked onto him. "Renfield, you've got incoming," Wayne shouted. Evasive maneuvers. John didn't need the warning. He saw the missile streaking toward him, its trail a streak of death. He dove, the missile following like a predator. His hands flew over the controls, executing a desperate series of turns and rolls. The missile adjusted, its tracking systems unerring. The disruptor's hum grew louder, the ship shaking under its strain. With a sharp pull, John brought the craft into a vertical climb, the missile closing fast. At the last moment, he released a decoy pod, its signal mimicking his own. The missile veered, detonating in a violent bloom of fire and debris. John felt the shockwave ripple through his ship, but pressed forward. 5 clicks. Marlowe's voice echoed in his ear. "You're in range. Deploy the disruptor." John steadied the craft, his eyes locked on the flagship. He toggled the disruptor's activation sequence, feeling its power surge through the interface. The device whirred, the energy within it building to a crescendo. Outside, the flagship's shields flared, their shimmering surface a barrier of impenetrable energy. "Here we go," John muttered, his voice barely audible. He released the disruptor. A beam of pure gravitic force lanced out, invisible to the eye but devastating in its effect. It struck the flagship's shields, the impact rippling like a stone cast into a still pond. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the shields collapsed in a cascade of light, their protective barrier shattered. The comms erupted with cheers from the fleet. "The shields are down." Wayne's voice boomed. "All units, focus fire on the flagship." John allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. The disruptor's energy spike had damaged his systems, warning lights flashing across his console. His ship shuddered, its engines straining to maintain control. The flagship's guns turned on him, their wrath concentrated on the one who had broken their invincibility. John braced as the first shot struck, his craft jolting violently. Alarms blared, but he held firm, guiding the ship toward the flagship's exposed hull. "If I'm going down," he said through gritted teeth, "I'm taking you with me." The ship's remaining weapons fired, their blasts slamming into the flagship's surface. Explosions erupted along its hull, secondary detonations rippling outward. The Empire's vessel groaned, its structure beginning to collapse. John's craft spiraled, its systems failing. He reached for the ejection lever, his vision swimming. With a final, desperate pull, he launched clear of the wreckage, his escape pod hurtling into the void. As he drifted, John watched the flagship erupt in a catastrophic explosion, its debris scattering into the stars. The Empire's formation faltered, their forces retreating in disarray. The tide had turned. The comms crackled. "Renfield, are you alive out there?" Wayne's voice was a lifeline. John coughed, his body aching but intact. "Still here, Admiral." "Good. Because the war's not over yet." John smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the stars. Humanity had unleashed its rage, but this was only the beginning. The Empire had been dealt a blow, yet the battle for freedom was far from finished. For now, though, they had hope, and John Renfield had proven that humanity would never surrender. The battlefield lay quiet now, a vast expanse of wreckage floating in the cold void. Where once the Imperial flagship loomed, there was only a graveyard of shattered steel and flickering embers. John Renfield's escape pod drifted among the debris, its systems barely functional. He stared out of the small viewport, watching the aftermath of the battle unfold. Victory, if it could be called that, hung heavy in the air. A faint signal crackled to life in his comms. "Renfield, we've locked onto your location. Hold tight, rescue's on the way." He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Copy that, Admiral." "Status of the fleet?" There was a pause before Wayne answered, his voice somber. "We held, but the cost was steep. Half our ships are gone, and most of the survivors are too damaged to fight again. But the Empire's retreating. For now." John closed his eyes, letting the words sink in. They had survived. Barely. The flagship's destruction had broken the enemy's will to continue, but it was a fragile reprieve, not a definitive end. The Empire was vast, its resources nearly inexhaustible. This battle, monumental as it was, had only slowed them down. The rescue ship appeared moments later, its approach slow and deliberate. John's pod docked with the vessel, the hiss of the airlock signaling his retrieval. He stumbled out of the pod, his legs unsteady but his determination intact. A medic rushed to his side, scanning him for injuries, but he waved them off. "I'm fine," he said, though his body ached and his mind was clouded with exhaustion. "Where's Wayne?" "In the command bay," the medic replied. "He's waiting for you." The walk to the command bay was a gauntlet of silent faces, crew members who had seen too much, lost too many. They saluted John as he passed, their expressions a mix of respect and sorrow. He returned the gestures, but said nothing. Words felt inadequate. Admiral Wayne stood at the center of the command bay, his uniform stained with soot and sweat. A hollow display flickered before him, showing the remnants of Earth's fleet regrouping. He turned as John entered, his face grim but relieved. "Good to see you in one piece," Wayne said, offering a hand. John clasped it firmly, the gesture speaking volumes. "What's the situation?" John asked, his voice hoarse. Wayne sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "The Empire's pulling back to regroup. We've bought ourselves time, but not much. The Allies are retreating to their respective sectors, and our remaining forces are consolidating around Earth. We're alive, but barely. And the people?" John asked, his chest tightening. "Celebrating," Wayne said with a faint, bitter smile. "They're calling you a hero, Renfield. The man who broke the Empire's shield." John shook his head. "Heroes don't leave half their fleet dead in space." "We didn't have a choice," Wayne said firmly. "The Empire would have annihilated us. You gave them a reason to hesitate. That's more than anyone else could have done."